Hello, and welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm Dr. Tracy Steady Hardcastle. We're here tonight to talk about your home and mold and your body all together. The modern human spends roughly 90% of life indoors. I'm not saying all of you do, and I'm not saying that I do, but the modern human. And our biology is constantly responding to this constructed environment. And sometimes we have chronic symptoms that stick around, not necessarily because of something that's directly going on with our body, but because the environment is not ideal, because our nervous systems are receiving a danger signal, or our detox pathways are overwhelmed. And so, starting to think about health from a little bit of a different lens from systems biology and genetic susceptibility and neuroimmune signaling can really make a lot of sense. And mold exposure is definitely a big piece of something that can really keep us from regaining our health back. So while our genes don't determine our destiny, they can affect how we respond to mold. And likewise, while we may or may not ever have a mold exposure, if we do, taking care of that is really vital. So I'm very excited this evening to have with me Jason Earle. Jason is a man on a mission. He is an adoring father of two young boys, an incurable entrepreneur, and indoor air quality crusader. He is the founder and CEO of Got Mold and the creator of the Got Mold test kit. The realization that his moldy childhood home was the underlying cause of his extreme allergies and asthma led him into the healthy home business in 2002, leaving behind a successful career on Wall Street. Over the last 2 decades, Jason has personally performed countless sick building investigations. I love that. It makes him sound like a detective, solving many medical mysteries, again, along the way, helping thousands of families recover their health and peace of mind. He has featured or appeared on Good Morning America, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, The Dr. Oz Show, Entrepreneur, Wired, and more. Welcome, Jason.
So good to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are thrilled to have you here. So, Jason, when you and I were talking before the webinar, one of the things that you were telling me about is how you see the home as an extension of the human body, not really separate from it, but part of it. Can you share with our audience what you think about that?
Yeah, this is an epiphany that I had a few years ago. And you think the word shelter actually comes from shell. And so the building biologists, which is sort of for those of you who are not familiar, a really good option when it comes to getting home assessments done as opposed to a traditional mold inspector. They refer to the building as the third skin. So we've got our dermis, and then we've got clothes, and then we've got this third skin, which is the building. And I remember hearing that, and sort of a light bulb went on, and I realized that really the buildings that we live and work in are often thought of as these boxes that we live, work, and store our stuff in. These inanimate things that are just kind of, it's an asset, and or it's an expense. It's more of a burden than anything else, and we kind of defer maintenance, and there's all these things that we do with our own bodies too. But ultimately, these buildings are sort of disregarded as these inanimate objects. And I now, based upon my experience, having seen the transformations that occur, both the disease states caused by sick buildings and the healings caused by buildings that have reached equilibrium, buildings that have become healthy, and how that downstream effect is so profound, that I now believe that buildings are an extension of your immune system, essentially an exoskeleton and an exoskin. And so, as I begin sort of unpacking that, you really look at the building as you could even look at it as an organism, because by definition, an organism is a system of organs. And so you start really getting into this, you can start really anthropomorphizing, if you will, or really starting to look at the building as something that actually has it has a lifespan, right? It's got a birthday. and maybe even a death day. And its longevity is largely driven by how well it's cared for. And we know that sick buildings lead to sick people. We also know that healthy buildings can support unhealthy lifestyles. Actually, like you have to do if you do everything right and you've got a lousy environment, you're still going to be sick. If you do everything kind of half-assed and you've got a healthy environment, you're going to do a lot better than the average bear. And so it's so foundational, and it's hiding in such plain sight that we can't even see it. And so, sort of my call to arms now these days more than ever is to change people's awareness to start seeing the relationship that they have with the building. And you need the building. The buildings don't do well without people. They fall apart, and people don't do well without buildings. Nobody wants to be in that situation either, right? And so, recognizing the importance and the value of your relationship with your building in terms of your health and longevity is kind of my goal when I have these conversations. Um, and ultimately, what I hope is that at the end of these discussions, that you see things a little differently, that you can't unsee it. Oliver Wendell Holmes once said that the mind changed by a new idea never regains its original dimensions, and I kind of like that idea.
Definitely. I love that. So let's take a quick look at our poll before we go any further because we want to see what our audience has to say today.
Yes.
Um, so our first question was about they ever been concerned about mold exposure? And a whopping 63% are currently concerned, Jason.
Wow.
That's really significant. Is that representative of what you see? Do you think that this is really on people's radar, or is our audience who's tuned in particularly tuned into this situation?
It's a really good question. I mean, I tend to see, sampling bias when it comes to these things, right? No, people don't sign up for something they don't care about. And so like people would always ask me, how many houses do you go in and have mold? And I'm like, for all of them. But now the difference between having mold and a mold problem is an important distinction. Every house has mold, just like it's ubiquitous. But do you have mold growth, or do you have conditions conducive to mold growth? Most of the homes that I went into over the course of 18 years, many, many thousands, I lost track, 10 years in, and most of that have a mold problem. But keep in mind, the people have made a decision that they're going to spend $1,000, $1,500 or more to have somebody come in with a mold sniffing dog, and sometimes they'd fly us out. So like they had already reached a certain degree of confidence that they had a problem otherwise. But we did have people once in a while, I must say, with the dogs. It didn't happen with me individually, but we did have people that I'm pretty sure hired us just to see the dog, and didn't really. There were a few that stand out. Then I'm like, afterwards, I was like, or were you really worried about mold? They're like, well, we really love dogs and we really just want, but yeah, of course we want to be proactive, and but that's not the American way, right? People react in America. And I think there's a strong sampling bias here that would self-select this group. But I'm grateful to have such a density of people that are concerned, because it's that your awareness about this it doesn't begin until you have some concern, right? It's just one of those things. It's like AIDS or cancer. It's not going to affect me until it does. And then when it does, suddenly you're in that club. And so then you have the opportunity for irreversible knowledge. And this is something that I think is so fundamental. Modern buildings get moldy very quickly. This is like learning how to tie your shoes. This is like learning how to jumpstart a car. These are fundamental practical things that you should maybe jumpstarting. It's not such a great analogy these days, but you get the point. These are fundamental things that we need to know how to do. You know how to use money, like learning how to operate your building, how to navigate moisture issues, how to deal with mold is, I think, table stakes for modern life.
Excellent. So about 37% of our audience has done professional mold testing. About 8% have done home testing. And then over 50% of them have either thought about it but haven't, or haven't done it. And so there's a lot of interest, but not necessarily a lot of direct experience. The numbers are different there. In terms of symptoms most associated with mold exposure, most were identifying fatigue or brain fog and respiratory or sinus issues, with fewer thinking about skin and digestive issues, and 16% just really weren't sure. So that they're going to get some great education from you about that as well. And Um, Most of the audience did think that genetics affect how people respond to mold exposure. Once again, a little bit of bias in our in who our audience is, and they are most hoping to learn today prevention and detox strategies, how genetics influence it, how to test accurately for mold, and general education in whether or not mold could be affecting them. So we've got some good curiosity uh, brewing for our webinar this evening, Jason. It's very
Yeah,
exciting.
I love it. I've got, some questions right off the bat. Like what's really curious to me is why the 5% who say no or the 2% that never thought about it, which is 7%, it's not insignificant, why they're interested. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to comment in the chat. If you answered no and you never thought about it, what was the curiosity that got you here? Is it because you'd like to see Dr. Steady or Jason? Or is it because maybe there's somebody who you're in that you love that's gone through it? I don't know, but I'm curious about that. And I'm excited to dig into, of course, the genetics. I'm also really looking forward to digging into some of the prevention and detox strategies. When we get into that, I think there'll be some counterintuitive things that we can talk about.
Excellent. If so, we've got somebody who just wanted more information, and
We'll
we have
learn.
a
That's
very
awesome.
curious audience, and I love that because you and I were talking about how we're both very curious people by nature. So, and just
Indeed.
so that all of you know, you're only only the host and panelists can see your answers. So if you're in the chat, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. But if you do want to put something in the chat, just know that your name isn't going to be shown to all of the other participants. So curious because of water issues, being treated for mold toxicity, studying functional medicine, and wants to be prepared for future clients. Awesome. That's very cool.
Very
Thank
cool.
you all for participating in the poll and for answering Jason's question in the chat. I want to quickly, oh, I just wanted to very quickly have you touch on your concept of the human as the nervous system of the home, because I thought that was really a very interesting, and then I'll get into the genes, I promise
Yeah, sure.
everyone. But
So
I liked this. So
it's a fun rabbit hole. It's a metaphor that plays all the way through. It's actually the basis for the book that I'm currently slogging my way through. Um, and it kind of takes that whole idea of the building as an organism and unpacks it. So if you look at the building as an organism, well, what are the organs? And so you've got a respiratory system in the HVAC, right? You've got a circulatory system. I'm hyper simplifying, but circulatory system you could argue is plumbing, lymph, drainage. You could the nervous system. You could argue is the electrical system, and or the alarm system, or the alarm system. There's a structure, right? There's bones with the structural timbers, fat in the insulation as the insulation. Even if you look at a cross section of a wall assembly, there's layers of dermis, of skin, and sometimes 3 layers. It's remarkable how similar building we've got exhaust pipes, we've got effluent out the back from the sewer lines. And there's two things that seem to be sort of glaringly missing from this metaphor is where is the nervous system? I mean, rather, where's the immune system, which I think is compelling. And I would actually argue that we're the immune system. We are actually responsible for making sure that all this stuff. We're here to maintain the building. We're there to buildings begin to die the moment they're built, so they begin to decay, and so it's our job to maintain that. And of course we're the beneficiary of that too, right? So it's like taking care of your body. And so if you choose not to do that, you will pay the consequences. Maybe not today, but give it enough time, and you will look back at that and say, "Wish I woulda, wish I coulda." And so when I start thinking about those building systems, the our place within the building, you could also, by the way, there's also you can go further with it, and you can even say that we're like a cell in the body, where the building is the building envelope and the cell membrane, and we're the mitochondria inside, really, which are responsible for energy production and cellular defense. And so when we're either busy working or we're actually defending the exterior. And so we're maintaining the organelles, we're doing all the communication. And so So the thing that I think is interesting about the metaphor for the building as an organism is that when you start talking about testing and inspections and remediation, the parallel goes right through there too. So, for example, if you want to, you wouldn't just rely on a cholesterol test to diagnose heart disease, right? You'd get a physical, you'd go to a doctor, they would look at your structure, and that's what an inspection is like. An inspection of your home for mold is a physical for the building. And it's the person's going to come over and it's going to first get some data from you. What's the building history? What's your symptom profile? Same as sitting down with a doctor, right? Why are you here today? I would sit down in front of customers and say, why am I here today? Just tell me why I'm here. And it's very much like a doctor's visit, right? And then I would do a physical inspection of the exterior, just like they do a mold check or hey, let's take a look at you, right? And then get down and look in the crawl space. And I'm going through the entire building with a fine tooth comb to look for things. So this is very much a physical for the building. And then you determine if testing is necessary. Testing doesn't precede the inspection. The inspection determines what testing is to be done. And then the information is then brought together in a holistic manner, and then a treatment plan is put together. In our case, it's a remediation and repair plan, right? These are the things that are defects that are leading to moisture issues or that could lead to moisture issues. And so that work gets articulated in a report. And then you would potentially schedule surgery, which is what remediation is. And in that case, you're going to want to have a specialist. This is very important. That's highly qualified. This is a big deal that can impact the health and livability of your house, not to mention the saleability of your house. And so you're going to want to make sure that you get a specialist. And by the way, that's usually a team thing. If you get big surgery, you're going to want your GP involved, right? And that's what the inspector does. The inspector helps you to guide that process, oversees, make sure that there's aftercare, does the whole thing, does more follow-up testing with you. And that's what a proper inspection should be. A post-remediation verification is part of the industry standard, where a third-party qualified independent inspector comes in after the work is supposedly done to assess, to determine whether it is in fact done. And so there's accountability in that kind of a scenario. And so again, the metaphor for treating the building as a body, as an extension of your immune system, the metaphor plays all the way through.
And then we can actually bounce it back into the body, right?
That's right.
Because some of the genes that affect this are the things that affect the ability to get toxins out of the body. So it's we can kind of come back full circle with it in terms
Absolutely.
of going down to the very smallest detail, the very foundation, the blueprint, right? So there's the architectural blueprint, and then there's our blueprint, our genetic blueprint. And so some of the places that all of you might want to be taking a look to see about your own resilience when it comes to mold, I'm going to talk about the physical ones first, but there are going to be some surprises for you later on with some of the genes that we're going to mention. So definitely looking at your anti-inflammatory profile, you're looking at your glutathionization genes. So for those of you who have your results already from the updated test, we talk about how glutathione is made. We just did a webinar about that last week. Dr. Kosterman and I did. But then for those, everyone has the GST genes, everyone who has their DNA 360. So pulling up the reports here is going to be a little bit more helpful than necessarily looking at the individual genes, because we have a lot to cover this evening. So I'm just going to kind of point you in the directions to be looking in, because glutathione is something that attaches to some of these mycotoxins and makes them less reactive and easier to have excreted. And it helps to neutralize oxidative stress. So if you're someone who has a suboptimal profile, this could be a place where you might have a little bit of more of a difficult time overcoming a mold exposure. Not necessarily, but perhaps. And that's where taking some precursors to glutathione and supporting your system in that way could really be helpful. And for those of you who have an excellent profile in the GST genes, but maybe not so much in the making of it, this is where maybe some supplementation of glutathione itself could be helpful to you, because you're able to utilize it to do the job that it's supposed to do to help to get to help get the mold out of your system. Another interesting place, and this one's found in diet and nutrition. So it's really easy if you get the app on your phone to switch back and forth quickly between reports. It's pretty easy on the computer too, but if you're also trying to have Zoom going, it can be a little much. So I usually like to have my phone doing that while Zoom is on my computer. In diet and nutrition, DAO is another gene to take a look at. And if you don't have a lot of this enzyme activity, it can limit your body's ability to break down histamine, leading to higher circulating histamine levels. And mold exposure can trigger immune activation and histamine release. No surprise there. That's why some of you immediately thought of respiratory symptoms when you thought about mold, because that is a very common response, I think, to even walking into a moldy building. So people with lower activity may experience amplified symptoms. So to be clear, this is in the upgraded DNA 360. So if you're looking for it and you got tested several years ago and don't have your new reports yet, you're not going to see this. But for those of you who have your updated reports, look in diet and nutrition. And so if you have this lower activity, it can prolong inflammation and make recovery from mold exposure more difficult due to impaired histamine clearance. So I wanted to throw those two places, and we'll go over some more genes later, but I'm excited to have Jason here and I want to hear him talk as much as I can. So we talked a little bit about the home as a cell and the home as the mitochondria. We're going to get back to some mitochondrial things with genes in a little bit, but I really think it's very important. I didn't know how quickly you have to act um, after water damage. So I want to make sure that we get to that immediately. If you can talk about water damage and mold and timing, Jason.
Yeah, this is like incredibly important. It's one of the things that whenever I talk about this, people are surprised by. And so mold, first of all, we build buildings out of mold food. So I just want to state that this is not the case in all buildings, but it is built in modern buildings in America, and unfortunately in Australia and New Zealand and Canada. So the sheetrock is really the main problem here with our modern buildings. So the most buildings back in the old days, when they get wet, they had drying potential. And so and the materials didn't support fungal growth. So you wouldn't see you see some surface mold. Oldly, you think about the old stone buildings or plaster buildings. The mold that grows on there from condensation is really just surface mold. The mold that we have in modern America is inside wall cavities, often underneath floors. It's buried in porous materials. So when then there's water damage in a modern building, water gets into all these nooks and crannies, and it's very hard to get to it without destruction. And so a lot of people postpone that. They're scared they don't want to rip the house apart. They don't want to open walls, sheetrock. And so that people pause, they hesitate. They want to wait till their brother or their uncle or their plumber or their insurance agent, they want to wait because they're really just procrastinating. But the truth is that you have 24 to 48 hours to respond to water damage before you are in the high risk zone. According to industry standard in the IICRC S520, lots of letters and numbers there, but it's the only consensus accepted standard in the industry. Actually, it's according to S500, which is the water damage standard, that at the 72-hour mark, wet materials that have not been properly dried need to be treated as if they're moldy, whether they are moldy, visibly moldy or not. But you will notice at 48 hours, the odors start to develop, which is the first sign of mold growth. The musty odor is not just, it's a signal that there's actual digestion and decay beginning. So you want to get to the moisture before it turns into mold, because then it turns into a mold remediation project. Water damage is covered by insurance, almost to the replacement cost value of the house. It's incredible. You get a big flood. Now, you don't want to ring that bell if you don't have to, because your insurance rates will go up. I warn you. However, it's better than having to deal with a mold problem because it's 10 times the cost. Water damage is X, mold remediation is 10X. Okay. And also, insurance pays for the X. Insurance does not pay for mold remediation. It caps it usually around 5 or 10 grand. So it's a cash pay and it's 10 times more. And the difference is 24 hours. So it's a huge difference. And oftentimes a mold remediation project, water damage is disruptive. Yes. But mold remediation, you're moving out usually if it's significant, and a perfectly executed mold remediation project by a qualified professional with an inspector coming in, doing the inspection, doing the testing, doing the report, getting the contractors involved, writing the scope of work, overseeing the project, doing the testing at the end is a month. So you're going to be living somewhere else for a month. Okay. And insurance may or may not be paying for that. Remember, right? If it's not part of a covered claim, in other words, it was a maintenance issue or you've already rang that bell a couple times, it's very, very common for them to deny mold claims and you are on the hook. So the solution is act quickly and you really legitimately have 24 to 48 hours. We're in the process of putting together a water damage survival guide for this, specifically to address all the things that need to be known. And so maybe we can, do something about that later. That's probably about 2 weeks away. But it is of the utmost importance. It's probably if you can act quickly, you save yourself an untold amounts of money. And by the way, you're also reducing the risk of exposure in that process too. The one caveat is that you don't want to start ripping out wet materials if there has been previous flooding there that was not addressed properly, because then you will release mold into the building. So if there's any concern of a pre-existing mold from pre-existing water damage, you want to let the water damage mitigation people know that in advance so they can properly contain the workspace and treat it like mold. And so that you will reduce the risk of contaminating your entire house. And so that's the one big caveat. If there's any risk of pre-existing conditions in the building, pre-existing water damage and mold in that area, you don't want to do any weekend warrior stuff with that.
That makes a lot of sense. And that would also probably be a good way of screening the expert that you have come in to do the water cleanup situation, is if you say that and they're like, that doesn't matter, a little bit of an alarm bell goes off, right?
Yeah, and the other thing you want to watch out for
Sure.
when water damage guys come in is they all want to spray chemicals, and so you want to hire someone that uses a green approach. The only reason to use chemicals during water damage if it's what they call gray water or black water. So water damage comes in three flavors: clear water, gray water, black water. Clear water is like sink water. It's overflowed from a tub, for example. So it's clean water. Gray water is post-use water. So anything that has some degree of contamination, after water that's come out of the laundry, for example, you don't want that. That stuff will have some degree of nutrients and potentially bacteria. And black water, which is sewage, river water, ocean water, rich in nutrients, rich in bacteria. And in those cases, sanitizing is necessary. But in those cases, you also want to opt for something that's more peroxide based, that doesn't have fragrances. Many of the people who are concerned about mold or have been affected by mold are also chemically sensitive. And one thing is, you get rid of the mold, but you have a fragrance. Good luck getting rid of that. So it's real easy to put those things in your house, real hard to get them out. And so you want to stay away from things like ozone, which are indiscriminate oxidizers, actually destroy lots of other materials in the building and are harmful to human health, kill house plants, lots of things like that. There's lots of shortcuts, but there's also very simple solutions to these things. The most important thing is you want to ask the right questions, and you want to make sure that the person that's treating this understands that if there's risk of mold, you disclose that. You also want to make sure that they follow industry standard S500, and then if it's mold, S520. You ask them that, get certified people, IICRC certified workers. So it is a bit of a labyrinth, to be honest with you. That's why we're creating that user guide. But just a few intelligent questions, and again, focusing on a green clean really will making sure that people are not just indiscriminately spraying these incredibly pungent antimicrobials in homes, because the antimicrobial is bad and then the fragrance lingers for a very long time in many cases.
And some of you will notice in back to the GST report that if you have suboptimal genes there, that you may already feel more sensitive to fragrances. So paying attention to these things that your own body is trying to tell you is really important. I am going to jump quickly into where you can look once again in the anti-inflammation report at your mitochondria. So if you look in there, and everyone should have SOD2 and GPX in their reports. Those of you who have gotten your new gene reports back already, you'll also see CAT in there. And these genes really help the mitochondria deal with reactive oxygen species. And so SOD2 converts oxidants into hydrogen peroxide, and then CAT and GPX neutralize that hydrogen peroxide, and then things can be taken out of the body. And if any place in there something goes wrong, then these reactive oxygen species can accumulate, and that can affect your energy levels, which is why people can end up with fatigue and neuroinflammation rises. And I know Jason wants to talk about neuroinflammation in a little bit. And your nervous system is detecting threat, right? So you're look the three genes to look at. For some of you it'll be two. It'll be SOD2 and GPX. And for some of you, you have a third gene to take a look at, which is CAT. Um, so take a look at those in your gene reports. So now I do have, remind me that I want to come back to a question about the natural options later. I want to make sure that we get to everything you want to, but I do have my own question. Jason, um, let's talk about neurogenic trigeminal nerve activation and environmental exposure.
Yeah. Now we're talking.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I we're
This
ready
is
for
exciting.
it.
I mean, listen, when I start talking about the trigeminal nerve, my wife knows that's an exciting topic for me, and she leaves the room. So, but here, here's the deal. This is a missing link potentially, and it's something that's been talked about for like 40 years, in certain circles. But there's this misplaced blame, and this is going to shock everybody, I hope, um, on mycotoxins. Everybody blames mold-related illness on mycotoxins. And boy, it sounds logical, right? Mycotoxins, scary word. It's in the news, it's in the media. All the docs are talking about it, especially on Facebook and Instagram. It's like it's the disease du jour, really. But the facts are that mycotoxins do not become airborne in residential environments the way people imagine them. It's just not. It's not supported by the science. That's not to say that they're not real, and they are, and they're a very real health threat. But most of your exposure comes from food. So if you're taking mycotoxin urine panels, for example, which are very, very trendy these days, you will often be told that you've got mold in your body. This is actually a false narrative. Mold does not colonize in the human body the way you might think, except in the respiratory tract. Environmental molds are obligate aerobes. That means that they require oxygen. There is no significant oxygen in the gut to support the kind of metabolic activity that is being blamed on these molds. And they're certainly not releasing mycotoxins into your system. There are very few circumstances where there's an exception, and that fusarium and but those are fringe cases where this is end of life kind of fungal infections. And this is not within the normal population. If you're sitting here, this is not happening to you. You will be in the hospital. So what is really happening here? Well, okay, so we know mold produces thousands of chemicals, even without mycotoxins being part of the conversation. Mold is a chemical factory, and it's digesting everything that it eats outside of itself. So what you smell are the digestive byproducts. Now, it's pretty logical to assume that if you suck on the tailpipe of any living organism for long enough, you're not going to feel well, right? And essentially, what mold is doing is digesting your home, and you're breathing in the digestive byproducts. Yummy, right? So what we're talking about here is taking mycotoxins, which are only about 100 species produce, and even those only produce them under specific circumstances, and sort of putting that to the side, because the fact is that they're relatively sticky. They are on the spores. If you got a high spore count environment, which our test detects, you might be exposed to some mycotoxins, but the data doesn't line up with airborne exposure equals the yield that's seen in mycotoxin urine panels. There's not one reputable study that backs this up. This is completely lab bench science. It has not been validated. None of them have been validated. So what is the actual functional mechanism that could explain the kind of rapid onset of symptoms and also the rapid decline in symptoms that people often experience when they leave a moldy building? Because the toxicity model would imply that you have a buildup of toxicity, and it doesn't happen. You don't get a spike and then a resolution. That's not the way that toxicity occurs. But the most common symptom profile for people experiencing mold-related illness is a pretty acute symptom, and then based upon how long they're exposed, that generally indicates how long the symptoms last. So acute exposure, acute symptoms; chronic exposure, chronic symptoms. But the tail on it is much faster than a typical toxicity and detox model. So what are the operative mechanisms? Well, we know that all molds produce microbial VOCs, which is, and all of them do this during active growth. And we know that's the musty smell. And so my good friend Joan Bennett at Rutgers University was affected by, she's a mycotoxin expert. She was affected by, she was wearing a respirator in a moldy home in New Orleans that she was inspecting. It was her house, and the musty smell got through, and she got sick, and she decided that she was missing something. And so she went back to the lab and began studying microbial VOCs. And I was using mold dogs at the time. And she called me one day because she saw me on the news and said, "I'd like to meet your dog. Please come up to Rutgers. It's okay if you come too." And she showed me her lab, and she changed my life. And so she began showing me what she was doing with fruit flies, where she exposed these fruit flies to this chemical isolate. It's the mushroom alcohol. It's the musty smell chemical. One of the chemicals within the potpourri of musty smells, and 1-octantriol. And she began exposing fruit flies to this compound. And they're really special fruit flies because they actually fluoresce when they produce dopamine. It's a pretty cool trick. And you can buy these things online. It's amazing. So she begins exposing these fruit flies to the musty smell, and lo and behold, they stop producing dopamine. They start flying down instead of the light. They stop reproducing. They develop locomotor dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction. Parkinsonian-like symptoms is how she ultimately characterized it. She wrote a beautiful memoir-style paper called Silver Linings, which I highly recommend. You can go on NIH and look up Joan Bennett and Silver Linings, and it's written beautifully. It does not read like a scientific paper. It's her story. And she's just absolutely fabulous. But anyway, what she identified very, very astutely was that this is a neurotoxic compound. It's actually 40 times more toxic than toluene, which is mind blowing. And so what we have here is, what's the route of exposure? Again, we're back to toxicity again. Turns out that in your face, you've got this amazing cranial nerve called the trigeminal nerve that doesn't fall within any of the specialties. ENTs, they know about it, but they don't really do much with it. The neurologists know about it. They don't do much with it. Dentists, they know that not to mess with it but trigeminal neuralgia is a big, but it's not squarely in any wheelhouse. And anyway, so at the end of these nerves it senses heat, pain, cold, touch, and chemicals. And so what happens is, when you are sensitized either due to a large mold exposure or a large chemical exposure, the trigeminal nerve gets activated, and it's like a spidey sense, and it actually detects chemicals below the odor threshold. So it works with the olfactory. So if you smell it, yeah, it trades some information, but it operates below the odor threshold as a primary alert system. And when pungent VOCs are in your environment and you have become sensitized either through, again, a chemical or mold exposure, the nerves activate a signal which can trigger a cytokine storm. A neurogenic cascade is the way it's described, which it triggers inflammation as well as immune responses, mast cell activation, all that stuff people talk about with mold exposure. But the difference is, and the clear delineation is, that it's you get an acute symptom spike and then it falls off. And so the only mechanism that explains that logically, based on basic physiology, is a neurosensory irritation, not a toxicity overload. And so this gives us a whole different method for looking at this. And yes, GTOC pathways matter a lot. But the mycotoxin conversation is really about food, by the way. And so that means if you want to clean up your diet so that you're not getting that form of mold exposure, it's no sugar, no grains, no conventional meats and dairy. You have to really get to the edge of the grocery store, and you have to go very, very clean. And if you do that, what my experience has been, it's air, food, and attitude. And air, got to get your house clean. You got to minimize exposure. Food, that's another exposure. And then attitude is when we get into this whole idea about the nervous system dysregulation that's caused by these exposures, which is really the last mile usually for people getting better. And that's a whole different conversation. But there are some really great programs out there like Primal Trust, and Reorigin, Gupta method, DNRS, things like that. But so this is the missing link in the whole mold related illness conversation, and it's a really exciting time because the science is really coming out to support this model.
So I just want to make sure that everybody understood one key thing, which was, when you're doing certain kinds of testing, what you're testing for. So if you're doing a urine test for mold, you are not going to get a clear sense of what's going on in your house. You're going to get a good sense of what's going on in your food. Do I have that correct?
Yes, you have that so correct. There will be exceptions to that. They're rare. And in environments where there's high spore counts, very high spore counts, you can have mycotoxin via inhalation. that's when our test kit really shines in that case, right? You're not going to have a normal spore count and mycotoxin exposure through inhalation. This is not supported by any research. There's not one reputable paper that I've been able to find. And I challenge groups to this all the time. And no one's been able to show me anything to the contrary.
Got it. So then your testing does more for the actual environment. So there's a case to be made for both of these ways of testing. One is to test what's going into your lungs, and that your trigeminal nerve may sense before your nose does. And one is to test what's going on in your food. Or is the trigeminal nerve also affected by things that are in food, things which you're not smelling?
Yes. So the one receptor that's triggered is called the wasabi receptor. The other one's the capsaicin receptor. So these are, obviously sensitive to food and food-based aromas, right? So yes, there are lots of things that trigger. I mean, dust environments can actually trigger trigeminal nerve. Sound, extreme temperature shift. You look up the trigeminal. It's fascinating. It is such a primal sense that gets no love. But without it, we would be like a ship without with a ship without a rudder. But unfortunately, sometimes the rudder takes over, right? And it goes into the front of the ship, and it drives you into the rocks. And so the trigeminal nerve really takes over. It's supposed to save you, but when it gets overactivated, that's why you get this anxiety. People walk into a building, oh, I can't be in here, and they blow up, or they have this incredible the heart races. That's a deep visceral nervous system. It's a visceral thing. This is not a logical thing you can talk your way out of. So yes, but let me clarify something. There's a misunderstanding around tests. You are the best test. Okay. You are an exquisite array of precision sensors. Your eyes, your nose. If you see something, that's a test. I mean, it is data. Okay. If you see evidence of water damage, if you see signs of mold or moisture, that's important. The sense of smell cannot be diminished. I mean, best thing you do is take some time out from your house if you're worried about this, because your olfactors need to clear. If you smell a musty odor in your building, that's a problem that you need to immediately find the source of the moisture. If you smell new house smell or new car smell, which is, by the way, really alluring, right? We've been Pavlovianly trained to associate this to success. I smell now, I love my first apartment, freshly painted, and I didn't realize how bad it made me feel. Now I smell cancer, autoimmune disease when I smell a new house. Like I really feel, I feel like you can't have the conversation about mold without talking about VOCs, which are the man-made chemicals, because mold produces VOCs and they cross-sensitize. So you're exposed to a new building for a long time. In some cases, not even so long. Suddenly you're sensitive to mold. If you're exposed to mold for a long time, suddenly you can't go to the grocery store, the hardware store, or cocktail parties where people are wearing perfume. And so that cross sensitivity is a big deal. And that is happening in your eyes, mouth, and jaw, where your nerves literally come into contact with tissue and air. This is what's going on in your face. This is just a prime. So you are a test. Now, if you want to do testing, I believe in the urine panels for food exposures. I think they're useful for that. Look at your diet. By the way, if you're excreting, you're doing your body's detoxing. If you're not excreting and you're eating a modern diet, you may have detox problems. See, it's opposite of what you think. If you're excreting these things, which are hydrophobic, so they don't attach to water, and they're lipophilic, so they're stuck in your fat cells. If you're excreting these in significant quantities, congratulations, your body's working. But you still need to fix your diet. If you're not excreting them, then you may need to talk to someone who can help you push that stuff through, optimize your pathways and things like that. And that's where DNA companies, coaching, and things like that really can come into play.
And so there's another place where you can look in that same anti-inflammatory report that I was talking about before, which is how reactive you are, how much of the cytokine activation you might be likely to get. And so this is with the new report. You're going to be looking for the IL-6, IL-10. Some of these things would be interesting for you to look at. But there's one more place, and this was interesting to me when you brought this up. So the other place I want you guys all to look is going to be at your mood and behavior report. For those of you who have the new report under stress and HPA axis regulation, and see what it says. So I'm wondering how many of you, so put a one in the chat if this has ever happened to you, any of you who have maybe a chronic illness like Lyme disease or something like that, have ever been made to feel like it's in your head or you're overly sensitive or exaggerating, or that if you walk into a moldy building or somebody has too much perfume at a table near you at a restaurant that you have to leave. Um, if you have mold or another chronic burden telling your nervous system that you're unsafe and you have genes that set you up for compromised stress regulation, then that is going to impact you more than someone else. So the reason that I want you to put those ones in the chat is because I want to reassure you that this is not your fault, right? That these are biological things. And Jason has some interesting views also on safety and hypervigilance. So I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that, which is related to what I'm saying.
Yeah. So actually, I'm just responding to some of the Q&As here. So one of the questions
We're going
was
to get to that at the top of the hour, just to
I'll wait for that. But what I think is interesting is how long did it take for mold to clear your body? I lived in it for 10 years, and so and I've been out of it, but I've still got symptoms. Um, that your nervous system is shot from this. That's what's happening. So that you need to reclaim your nervous system, and that comes down to oftentimes. And I hate to say it because most people go, "Oh, this is overwhelming." So I'm going to give you the end game, and then I'm going to help you get there, which is you need a different worldview. This often comes with people. This often disproportionately affects people that already have anxiety. They're already sort of tuned up a little bit, and I can relate. I went through this. This is the reason I'm in this business, is because my own struggles with mold as a child. And so I know I am my people, so I get this viscerally. So the what we learn is that people who are in fear, who fear mold, who fear nature, who fear their buildings, don't get better. And the fear is totally understandable because it's not actually a logical thing. I mean, this is your nervous system has told you that this is not safe. So you can go to therapy, you can do affirmations, and you can do all that stuff, and it's helpful. But the real work comes down to somatic work, and neural retraining, limbic system retraining. And so there's a bunch of different pathways. I mentioned this earlier, but DNRS was the kind of the first one, and then Gupta, and then there's Primal Trust, which I really like a lot. Kat King's work, it's very affordable, and it's sort of at your own pace. And I recently just learned of another one that's audio only, called Safe and Sound. It's audio only. And that may very well be a great place to start for most people, because when I tell you that, there's meditation involved, that's usually a blocker for a lot of people. But it really does come down to this idea of what these programs do is create an environment where you can expose yourself to these perceived threats in a safe way, small amounts, kind of like allergy shots for the mind or the nervous system, so that you come back and they go, wait, I'm fine, and then you a little more, a little longer, and then wait, I'm good, right? And so, by the way, this is really effective for PTSD. And so this is, I think, what I want to impart here is that this is trauma, right? Environmental exposures, disproportionately large environmental exposures, are trauma on your nervous system. So give yourself the grace, all right, and understand that this is, you may be subject to this, but this is not your own doing, and you're not broken. You're off balance, and you're out of alignment. Really, your nervous system is out of alignment with reality. And so what happens is you have to make a decision at some point, and this is really hard, especially given the current circumstances of the world. Is this a dangerous world, or is this a safe world? Is this a dangerous universe or a safe universe? And my experience has been that when people actually get to the point where the whole healing journey, kind of like the grieving cycle that people talk about, where you get to you do all the deals, you denial first, and then you're making deals, and then eventually you get to the point of acceptance. And I have come to the conclusion that acceptance is not the end goal; it's actually gratitude. And so there will be a point when people shift their view to realize that this actually, once they get a grip on it and realize, wow, I can overcome this. And because I can't, because I believe I can, that's actually what allows it to happen. That's the first step. You have to believe you can get better, otherwise you won't. And then once you believe that, then what happens is the opportunities for your worldview to change suddenly open up, and you then start to be able to find that your experience with this actually makes you useful to other people. And it actually allows you to find a deeper level of compassion for others, which is something that's been super powerful for me. And so therefore, what you've done is you've really taken this adversity and turned it into an asset. And so that's what I see with people who really come out the other side of this kind of like victorious. They've decided to make this something that they're going to overcome and then contribute to the greater good. And so you don't have to necessarily go off and go into the industry, but just being someone who's been through it is often very useful for people that are just starting. So I would implore you to consider the fact that this is not a toxin-based thing, or that this is that you're not broken. This is environmental exposure. You can control your environment. This is one thing I want to impart before we leave, is that unlike the outdoor environment where we have no control, I mean, you have no control over most things in your life, if you're honest. But the indoor environment is this really cool thing where we have this disproportionate potential for control if we choose to exercise it. But most people don't, mostly because they don't know what to do. Also because they're too busy worried about paying the bills, getting their kids out to school, and all that kind of stuff. But if you stop and pause and just actually look at the importance, the foundational aspect of the indoor environment, and begin to take the steps to monitor moisture, to eliminate, to stop bringing smelly fragrance things in your house, stop bringing bad stuff in your house, get good air purifiers, keep things clean and dry, get good ventilation. It's not rocket science. It just takes a little bit of awareness. And when you do that, then you have the opportunity to create a sanctuary for yourself. And that's the opportunity that you have here, right? It's the opportunity for you to really create a special healing place for yourself. And it's not cost prohibitive. It doesn't need to be. But the first step really is the idea that you can get better. And committing to that will oftentimes open up the doorways for that to become true.
Which is the same thing that we try to help people do by understanding their gene pathways and why they're not getting better because of some of these detox problems and things like that. And so one of the questions I saw in the chat was, so which is it? Is it that you need to do these nervous system reprogramming things, or is it that you need to take care of the biology, because the biology is making some of you who have these more these less resilient HPA axis genes to not be able to calm down because of the inflammation. And it's both, right? And you'll notice in your reports that if you're someone who has the genes that say, you're more sensitive to stress, that all of the fixes for it are the things that Jason's talking about, right? That said, if you can't get rid of this inflammation that is contributing to that, and your body doesn't think it's safe, having these genes is going to make it harder for you to respond well to these interventions. So if you're sitting over here and everything is toxic and you're holding on to everything and there's a ton of inflammation, your mitochondria are mad, you can meditate, but it may not do what it will if you are able to get rid of the things in your environment that aren't working for you, get rid of the things in your gut that aren't working for you, like the other environmental exposures that are going in that way, and then work on strengthening or reinforcing the detox pathways so that you can recover from these things. So it's a both and. We're not actually contradicting each other. It may
Not at
have
all.
sounded like it, but we're absolutely not. So because we're both wanting to approach things from two different ways.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on it, it's you have to get your environment straight. You have to reduce or eliminate exposure to the best of your ability, and then support the biology, and then retrain the nervous system. And it's that in that order. It's that simple, and there's work to be done, right? I mean, but there is a clear pathway for getting better. And notice I didn't say that you have to do 10 detox protocols or spend all the time in the sauna. Those things help, maybe, but really the resilience comes from reducing exposure, supporting the biology, and then retraining the nervous system.
Thank you so much. We are going to, you find Dow in the diet and nutrition for those of you with the new test. So now we're going to jump in. We have several questions, which
We
is why
do.
I'm going to sneak in here first because I can. And have you ever had anyone use concrobium? What do you think about concrobium? I don't know if anyone else has asked this, but I had to ask this for myself because I was very curious.
Yeah, so I am. I can drop a link in here about biocides, an article I wrote about this. Um, There you go. So I just dropped that into the hosts and panelists if you want to
Awesome.
share that with the group. So my feeling on antimicrobials, I'm strongly opposed to them. Healthy indoor environments are actually, first of all, you don't need to kill mold to remove it. And mold remediation is about stopping the water and then removing it. So you clean the mold. You HEPA vacuums, damp wipes, or you have to remove the materials like sheetrock that's supporting the growth. Killing it just adds a chemical and actually just leaves behind dead mold. And by the way, there's really interesting data. If you're worried about mycotoxins in buildings and you spray a mycotoxigenic species that actively is producing mycotoxins, you piss it off actually, and it produces more mycotoxins. So you don't want to get into chemical warfare with a chemical warfare specialist. That being said, the mycotoxin thing is a de minimis concern. The main thing is that they also leave behind a chemical legacy. And so you're actually adding chemicals to a building when you really need to be removing things. There's a principle, it's a Latin term called the via negativa, which is improvement through subtraction. So actually removing the things that don't support you, as opposed to our medical system, which is where you have a symptom, you take a pill that causes 5 symptoms, 5 more pills. And so we layer on these solutions. In buildings, the best thing to do, as with our body often, it's removing the things that are causing it. You don't have to kill anything. So concrobium, now if you're going to use a cleaning agent, because you want to clean, there's hypochlorous acid. One of our listeners here asked about that. Hypochlorous acid is also made. There's a company called Force of Nature where you can make your own. It's a really nice surface cleaner. It's good for sanitizing on a very light basis. But as a general cleaning tool, that's about all I would use. Some people like to use peroxide if they really feel like they need to clean with vinegar. That's fine. I just don't like to use anything that's got quote unquote kill claims. Also, and I know this is quite an answer, but there's a very strong correlation between high microbial diversity, which means a lot of microbes in the building, different kinds, but in a balance. A diverse microbiome, just like in your gut, is correlated with much lower cases of asthma, allergies, and autoimmune disease. Buildings that are hypersanitized, that either or they have a high concentration of microbes because of an imbalance, have much higher cases of asthma, allergies, and autoimmune disease. There's arguments for hand washing dishes and using your dishwasher and all that stuff because, believe it or not, it increases the microbiome in your building, and you're not sanitizing everything. So the long and the short of it is, I don't kill mold. We remove it.
Thank you. All right, so I want to start out by saying we have a lot of wonderful questions. When we're getting into the specifics of some of you have put in what genes you have and are asking for exactly how to fix your issue. That's not advice that I can give via a webinar because I don't have I don't have your health history. I don't have your entire gene report in front of me. I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to work with you, as would any member of our team. But I can't offer you specific advice on a webinar. So I do apologize. I'm not ignoring you. That's just not the nature of webinar education. So, we have a question from Carol asking, how long does it take to detox mold from the body? So I'm assuming that this means like if I guess there would be two different ways. One would be from your respiratory tract after you cleaned up the environment, or how long do you have to stop eating these things in order to have to have it resolve? And is it case by case specific?
Yeah, it's case by case. The food part, big time. I mean, if you're losing weight, you're going to see stuff shed from food you ate when you were a kid. Honestly, like it really is insane. You see people lose weight and they just release all sorts of stuff. So I would say that it depends on what you're looking at about detoxing. Most, believe it or not, mold clears in a few days if you're out of an environment. So specifically on the VOCs, like think about alcohol. That's a very popular VOC. And after about 3 days, in a detox program, literally a detox program for alcohol, 3 days is where they start to be clear of that, right? So it actually happens fairly quickly when it comes to the acute exposures. Mycotoxins in general are very durable molecules. They do lodge into fat cells, and so that is a wild card that really it can't really put a time on. But that's one of the reasons why, like I said, saunas and cold plunge saunas and weight loss often yield larger mycotoxins in detox. So it's possible that you never fully detox. But there's also lots of protective mechanisms within the adipose tissue that allow for that to be the case without necessarily having lots and lots of problems. I mean, we've adapted to be around mycotoxins. We've adapted, and we've been with these chemicals for many thousands of years. It's just that the concentration of them and the way that we're ingesting them in highly processed foods, and we assimilate them much more quickly, has created sort of a critical mass, if you will. So there's really not a straight answer for that. But most people feel better when they leave the building in 3 days, and if you're not feeling better after that, then you really need to look at the nervous system
Yeah, and your detox
and your
pathways
detox
and all of
pathways
those
and stuff like
things,
that.
right?
Yeah,
So if it's not resolving pretty quickly, the question is why. And
that's right.
so I think that's where the next level of digging has to come in.
And I
So
also have to emphasize that if you leave mold, but you're going to a hotel and you're going to a building that has a lot of VOCs, you are going to be triggered by that. So this is very hard in our modern society. Everywhere you go, there's fragrances, Airbnbs, hotels, your mother-in-law's house, doesn't matter. So you go into a building, if you don't smell an odor, that's the beginning of a safe zone. Healthy buildings have no odor. Not even a
yeah,
healthy, not even this new paint smell. Healthy buildings don't have an odor.
yeah, Febreze. I take one step near anything with Febreze on it, and it's not a good scene. Anyway, if
Totally.
someone, Amara is asking if someone has been very mold ill in the past, should they only live and work in new buildings if possible, or can they safely live in a remediated home?
First of all, new buildings are probably the worst because A, they're built of mold food, and B, they're slathered with petrochemicals that off gas and actually cause a lot of these problems. Also, they're built really tight, so they don't have energy, they don't have enough air exchange. But there's no requirement for air exchange in modern buildings, in residential buildings. In offices, they do. So when it comes down to choosing the buildings that you live and work in, believe it or not, older buildings are better, but there's not many of them. It's a real challenge. I would say that if you're sensitized to the point where you walk into a building and you're having problems like that, I would again go back to go to those neural retraining programs and start there, because the key to this is not avoiding mold. Okay, we live on planet fungi. The planet, just to put a point on that too, every year Kingdom Fungi produces 50 megatons, rather, 50 megatons of spores, which is the equivalent of 500,000 blue whales. Get your mind around that, okay? It is the most prolific producer of biological particulate on the planet. We find spores 13.7 miles above the Earth's surface with weather balloons. It actually helps precipitate clouds and create weather systems, including snow, rain, and sleet. Spores are everywhere. You're not getting away from that. So the key is to build a resilient physiology, so that you can move through the world without having to worry about walking into certain buildings. That's the key.
Perfect. Elizabeth is asking, does breathing hydrogen help with mold detox in the body?
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't have any data on that. I can't help. I can't answer that. I wish I did.
Totally fair. Yeah, I would have to look into that myself. Lynn is asking, do you do mycotoxin air testing besides mold air testing?
Well,
So
first of all, I mean, I love that idea, and there's lots of people that have tried to do mycotoxin air testing. There are a few companies out there that sell what they call a mycotoxin air test. They don't have any threshold limit values that are meaningful. So in other words, there's no data that shows that this amount in the air is actually a problem. And in fact, what they do show is that they find very, very little in the air. So they only can say detected. The quantifying it is seems to be outside of the scope of these tests. And so I don't believe in mycotoxin air testing. I don't believe in looking at mycotoxins as a proxy for mold because only about 100 species out of the 400,000 taxa, and I would say out of the 1,000 that occur indoors on a regular basis, only about 10% produce mycotoxins. And so looking at mycotoxins as a source of human diseases, first of all, based on the false narrative that mycotoxins are the cause of this disease, that is not supported in any meaningful research. And I'm not talking about occupational exposures in grain silos and places where there's moldy environments, where people are working in these places. They get sick, hypersensitivity, pneumonitis. There's all sorts of occupational diseases that come from big mold exposures in residential buildings where there's not actually construction or remediation underway, where there's a huge concentration. Mycotoxins are not a meaningful function in most cases, not all cases, but most cases. But in all cases where you've got mold growth, you've got the microbial VOCs. And that is known to trigger immune responses in otherwise individuals that are otherwise not sensitive. So I don't believe in mycotoxin air testing per se.
Thank you. Carol is asking, what is the name of your book? Does it have a name yet? Sometimes
It,
people don't name it until it's until the very end.
yeah, it named itself. It's called Building Awareness.
Nice. I like that. There's like two meanings there,
Yeah,
right?
and it's really the story about how I kind of became aware of the various different things that we've talked about today, and sort of the cycle of my own awareness, and then there's a framework for how to begin the building of the body, and the metaphors we talked about earlier with the inspections and testing, and then at the end there's more of a reference guide for how to do remediation the right way, and how to hire a mold inspector and a remediator, and how to deal with water damage and all those kinds of things. It's kind of a reference guide.
Nice. Cheryl is saying that she was living in a wooden building that was constructed in 1907 in San Francisco, and that she thinks it led to a bunch of health problems for her. And she's feeling hypersensitive even to the slightest hint of mold in foods, like mixed fruit salad and nut butters. And she's wondering if it's common.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, listen, you're welcome to the club, sister. Like this is I mean, I'm not laughing at you. I feel your pain. This is it's real. This is you're a prime candidate for neural retraining. I mean, you really are. Mold avoidance is not a sustainable strategy.
so I think we've addressed this in the chat, but for those of you who don't see DAO in diet and nutrition, either you haven't gotten your new test back, or you're looking at the previous iteration of the DNA 360, which is still a wonderful and test with lots of great information in it, but that particular gene doesn't happen to be in it. Um, but it is in the new one if you want to get retested. Um, Jazz is asking, is it still dangerous if the water already dried up and left the drop ceiling with watermarks and it wasn't replaced with a new drop ceiling?
Well, first of all, drop ceilings are like if sheetrock's mold food, drop ceilings are caviar. It's just so it's so nutritious for and so absorptive, and also so easy and cheap to replace. Um, I would say that you want to replace them as soon as you see water damage on them because if it keeps going, then the mold will grow, and it's harder to moving a moldy uh, ceiling panel is going to cause a disturbance. There's no way around it. So if you see water damage, and by the way, that also usually what you'll see above it is you can see if it's a leak or condensation. That's the key to diagnosing the problem because you have to fix it. Otherwise, it's going to come back. And if you can't fix it, well, then you need to address that. Whether it be if it's at work, through OSHA or through whatever channels you have there, or if it's at home, you just need to. You're better off taking that ceiling tile down and putting a bucket underneath it until you fix it. But the short answer, the other answer is that, and this is very controversial. If you have mold, you had a one-time event, for example, and and it's not it wasn't a tremendous amount of water, a little leak in the ceiling, you got a little, a few inch circle or something like that, or even a 6 inch circle. If that's just that, if that's all you have, um, once it dries out, it is not a hazard. If there's visible mold on the surface, it will break, it will become airborne, and that could potentially be a problem for sensitive individuals. But when active mold growth is the problem. Mold spores are everywhere, right? 50 megatons, right? So every breath you take, you're breathing in hundreds of or thousands of spores without any ill effect. It's the concentration, it's the high concentration, and it's the byproducts of digestion of mold digesting your building that cause the problem. So the short answer is usually if mold is in a wall and there's no active growth, it's not too much of it's not really a hazard. I would draw a lot of heat for saying that in some circles, but that's been my experience.
Perfect. Jim is asking if you have central air, what can you add to your HVAC system to help with mold? UV light, HRV, ERV, and the ionizer,
Oh
etc.
yeah, all the gadgets. Well, first of all, as you might have noticed, I've got strong opinions about a few things. First of all, I do not subscribe to UV lights or ozone or any of the common third-party installations that go on HVAC systems. If you're worried about mold in your system, you need to focus on what the imbalance is that's causing moisture to accumulate in the HVAC. If you don't have a moisture problem, you won't have a mold problem, so you don't need to kill anything. And if you do have a mold problem, I have bad news for anyone who's got a UV light because everyone has them because HVAC guys are really good at selling them. They actually are not effective for moving air. They are designed to sanitize surfaces. The air moves too fast. And by the way, killing microbes doesn't do anything. Dead mold spores are still allergenic and potentially toxigenic. And yes, they won't colonize in your tissue, but they don't do it if you're healthy anyway. But if you're killing bacteria, you're releasing endotoxins, and so that's not good. So, and by the way, if you got bacteria, you got a moisture problem, you got a bigger problem. So there's no point in doing the UV lights at all. Now, if you want to improve the air quality in your house by orders of magnitude, especially if you have a VOC problem, in other words, a new house or a newly renovated house, getting an ERV, which is called an energy recovery ventilator or a heat recovery ventilator, depending on what climate you're in, and your HVAC company will know. HRVs are generally heating climates, and ERVs are generally in cooling climates. That will recirculate. It'll expel stale air and bring in fresh air, and it will transfer the energy from your heating and cooling into the air that's coming in. So it's not just spewing out. You're not just jacking up your electric bill, or your energy bill. So HRVs and ERVs will give you turnover in a building, and all of the accumulation of human off gassing, building off gassing, cleaning, all the things that we do in our buildings that accumulate, it gets diluted with fresh outdoor air. So what we really have here, by the way, is not so much building related illness as we have a nature deficit disorder, and so what ERVs do is in a kind of, half step kind of a way is bring more of the outdoors in without you having to open up the windows or raise your electric bill.
Lovely. So we've got a couple of people who are wondering about ozone and why ozone is bad. So if you
This
could
is a fun one
expand
too.
on that answer, we've got a couple of them who are
Yeah.
interested in knowing the specifics, please.
People love ozone. They love their ozone. I mean, this is like, people get attached to their ozone, and it's really hard to break them free of this. But I implore you to consider. Now, ozone has applications. There's no bad or good with any of this stuff, folks. It's the application of it, right? The mycotoxin panels aren't bad. It's just don't try to determine what's in your building from them, right? That's what's in your pantry. When it comes to ozone, ozone is very good at sterilizing things. So it's really good at things like if you want to sterilize, hospital equipment or, these kinds of things. It's effective at cleaning water systems, like if you've got a laundromat and you want to recycle the water, ozone's very effective for things like that. In buildings, there are major problems with using it. It is an indiscriminate oxidizer, which means that it attacks anything that was at one time living, essentially. So it goes after, fabrics, gaskets, oil paintings, house plants, mucosal membranes, really bad with kids and pets. And it also does this crazy thing, which is, and it's fascinating, because it's an oxidizer, it's O3, right? So the one oxygen molecule burns off. It's like it incinerates it oxidizes it. And so what it often does is it burns things impartially. So spores, pollen, whatever kind of skin cells, other things that are easily oxidized. And what it leaves behind are little bits of those things that have been chemically altered slightly, and that are now smaller and more deeply respirable. And so what we see in ozonated homes is actually the fungal load has not been reduced that much, but the particles are much smaller and more deeply respirable, which is especially problematic for people with with lower respiratory disease like asthma, right? So you don't want to be breathing things that are like 0.3 microns because it goes really deep into the lungs. Spores are in the single digit microns usually. And so it's important to look at that. Also, the other thing about VOCs is that they attack chemicals in the air too, VOCs, and they'll take otherwise stable compounds that are fairly benign, and they'll crack them open into their individual constituents, and then they go about and they go party together and they form together into other compounds, some of which are poorly understood or not understood at all, and some of which are very well understood. Like formaldehyde, for example, is one of the most common reformations of VOC, individual VOC components when they reconstitute. And so we don't want formaldehyde reconstituting in our house. It's a group 1 carcinogen. And that is really, truly one of the most common byproduct of oxygen, of ozonating an environment that's got any sort of VOCs. So is there a use for it? Yes. In buildings where people live in? No, in my opinion.
Thank you. Heidi's asking, what about the black and orange crud growing on the tiles in my shower? Are those harmful or just gross?
Not harmful, but you probably need to do a better job of ventilating the bathroom and keeping that clean. So shower grout is a funny thing. So shower grout will accumulate bioorganic growth, and it's got all sorts of, there's colors and there's mostly most of the time it's just pretty benign stuff. It grows on the soap scum really. Um, Usually that means that the shower hasn't hasn't been cleaned often enough. And then oftentimes the ventilation hasn't been used, and oftentimes a squeegee really helps get that water down into the drain. But the other thing that happens with grout is that when it's installed, they don't seal it. It's very porous, so soap scum gets into it, and then the molds and bacteria grow on the soap scum. So the solution is, if you want to clean that off, and use a bleach pen. It's one of the few times I'm going to tell you to use bleach because it's going to make it white. It's not because it'll get it to the point where it actually looks a lot better. And then get grout sealer. This is pretty potent stuff VOC wise. So if you're sensitive, you're going to want to wear a VOC like a respirator that has a P100 or a VOC gas cartridge. But then you seal that up, and then things will just bead up on that, and it will go off. What I worry about more, by the way, than mold growing on grout is missing grout and missing caulk, because these are built most of the time in modern construction. We're building on paper-based drywall, and it may very well be green board, or now a lot of times they're using cement board, thank goodness. But for decades they just use paper mache, they just use cardboard and tile. That's basically what we're building with. And if you have missing grout, water gets behind there. I have seen bathtubs that fall through I've seen rotten floor joists because of missing grout, where so much water got in over time that the floor joist rotted and the tub sank. And oftentimes there's a bedroom on the other side of that, and people really, I've seen a lot of major chronic mold exposures from missing grout and missing caulk, water getting behind the walls and causing a major mold problem on the back side of the master bedroom wall or the kids' bedroom wall. So more than mold on the grout, I worry about missing grout and caulk and water getting into wall systems that you're not paying attention to.
While you were mentioning bleach, we had a question where people say that using bleach causes mold to release mycotoxins. Is that inaccurate?
The studies have shown that I think this was done with Fusarium, that using antimicrobials on mycotoxigenic species stimulates mycotoxin production. And so, like I said, you don't want to go and get into a chemical warfare with a chemical factory. But that being said, mycotoxins are really based. The threat that they pose is mostly dietary, with very few exceptions. If you've got a black cave, you got 10 square feet of Stachybotrys in your house, this is a concern. But the typical environment where people are being diagnosed with mycotoxin related illness don't contain mycotoxins in sufficient amounts to justify the diagnosis. Look at your diet for that.
Do, do you have an opinion on serum testing, for instance, that by Dr. Campbell, as opposed to urine testing?
Yeah, I know Dr. Campbell really well. And he and I fight about this stuff all the time. We're friends, but we fight about this stuff all the time. I completely poo-poo his test, but with the one exception. Here's what I so because you have an IgG response to something doesn't mean that you're actually having a reaction to it. And so the fact that your body recognizes it and generates antibodies is simply a function of it saying, "I see you." Um, and so, in some cases, yes, you can have risk. I have sensitivities to pumpkin seeds. If I eat those, man, my wrist is going to kill me for 3 days. A lot of other stuff shows up on my IgG panel with no effect, with no ill effect when I eat it, right? So when you're exposed, when you get the Campbell's list of molds. By the way, the biggest problem I have with Campbell is that he recommends everyone take Sporanox, itraconazole, which is a very potent antifungal drug that has hepatotoxic, toxicity risks, and he suggests people take it like candy. That is for fungal infections. If we're worried about your building mold, you're not having a fungal infection. And already we've talked about this. Environmental molds are not colonizing. He says people take it that he likes people to take it because they feel better. Well, it's also an anti-inflammatory, and everybody feels better when they're a little bit less inflamed. Just because the pill makes you feel better doesn't mean it's actually solving the problem that you went to get treated for. If you want to look at that panel as a measure of exposure, I would say that you probably have to look at your foods first. And if you happen to do a urine panel and you happen to do the IgG panel, one thing you could potentially deduce is if you subtract the mycotoxins found in the urine panel from the IgG panel, the ones that are left you may be exposed to in some degree on an airborne basis. Because I could see an airborne exposure triggering an IgG reaction, an antibody. But I still will implore you to reconsider mycotoxins as the primary threat. This is not supported in science, no matter what Dr. Campbell or all the famous Instagram doctors have to say. That there is no research, none, not one reputable paper that actually supports mycotoxicity caused by an indoor residential environment. Um, Occupational, yes. Indoor environment, no. Indoor residential
I'm
environment, no.
I'm going to try and combine a few things because we're running out of time, which is do 5G and Wi-Fi make mold worse? And do coffee enemas and saunas help expedite detox? So like all of those have nothing to do with each other, but I'm just going to throw them all at you anyway.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the first question was repeat because it's not up on the board.
Was do 5G and
Yeah.
Wi-Fi make it grow more?
Okay. So that's just Dr. Klinghart's research, and I will say that it's very interesting. It's not been duplicated. I have a real hard time with these papers when there's no he also doesn't show his work, um, and so I have issues with papers that the science isn't replicated, and it's been cut and paste. It's one of those things that like Abraham Lincoln said this, and he didn't say that. Klinghart, has copied and pasted a lot, and listen, we need to be aware of frequencies. But I would say that again, if you're worried about mycotoxins in the building, let's focus on the moisture problem you have. If you have moisture problem, you have mold growth. If you have mold growth, you have a health hazard. It doesn't matter whether it's making mycotoxins or not.
And what about coffee enemas and saunas?
Yeah,
So helping.
saunas have a lot more impact, I think, than I'm not a detox expert, but I think that rather than focus on detox protocols, the focus is on reducing exposure, supporting your biology, and that you could look at this as supporting the biology. But I would be cautious about the enemas. I'd be more focused on cold plunge. I mean, saunas are incredibly powerful, and not just for mold, but also the data on longevity. The impact on longevity is outrageous. I mean, it's like two or three saunas a week it reduces premature death by like 70%. It's insane. So, like if you have access to a sauna, you should be doing it anyway. And obviously, it will also help you with pushing stuff out.
So some of you may have seen in the chat, but in case you missed it, we do have a code for 10% off of testing with Jason's company, Got Mold. There was a question that I happened to see scroll by in the chat because I can't really necessarily keep track of the chat and the Q&A at the same time, but it was about spot testing. Does your company do any spot testing for mold or No.
You mean like surface tests?
I just saw that it said, do you do spot testing? And then I have no idea where it was in the chat.
SPOT? Is that weird?
SPOT, yeah, like a little, like I think, like a spot, like a little spot,
Well, no,
as
but I'll
opposed
tell you
to a
what.
whole. Yeah.
I'm gonna drop another link here if you're interested. So one of the things that we're doing, this is where is this? Um, Here, MCT dust test. So so we sell one test, but that's not because we believe it's the test. It's because that's the first test that we made to create to solve a problem, which was making lab air testing affordable for people without having to hire a professional. That was the goal, right? Teach them how to fish versus feed them for a day. But the reality is there's a lot of other problems with the test that I've talked about. ERMI is a disaster. It's 36 species. It's 25-year-old technology. Its index is very high, causes lots of problems. It's abused by the most unscrupulous inspectors who drive really expensive inspections and even more expensive remediations based upon those results. They pair the bad results from mycotoxin panels, which are almost always high, with ERMI, and it's like going out into the night sky. Oh, see the stars, see those dots, and that's the belt of Orion. And we tell a story about that. And for thousands of years, we tell these myths. That doesn't make them true. And so that's the same thing that happens when you string together bad data. You can tell a story, right? But that doesn't make it a true story. And that's exactly what's happening. And people are getting their lives destroyed because of this stuff. Mold's bad enough. You get these guys that have figured out how to manipulate the data in a way that extract 100 grand from you. That's what's happening on a widespread basis. And I won't name names like We Inspect or Home Cleanse, but you get the point. And there's a real problem with this, and these guys are causing a lot of harm. And they know, and by the way, I've spoken to them about this stuff, so they wouldn't be surprised if they heard this come back through their channels. But the point is that this is actually a systemic problem in the industry. And so what we've done is gone out and decided we're going to fix some of these things. And so one of the things that we did was we just got, and it took a long time, but one of my dear friends is a top researcher at Yale. And they developed a new dust test over the last 10 years with a HUD grant. And I was fortunate enough to secure a global exclusive on that license in about 6 months ago. So we're in the process of building out a brand new dust test. And it uses next generation sequencing, which is the most advanced genetic sequencing available, of course. And then we're running it through AI and machine learning based on a model of samples that have been collected all over the country. And we're also doing it in Australia. So we're going to actually be able to give you a proper assessment as to what the fungal ecology is in the building with a very high degree of accuracy. Early innings were at 95% accuracy based upon a relatively small data set. So that's super exciting. So I just dropped, I think did I drop this? Yeah, there's a Jot form that I jumped in there. If anybody wants early access to that, then you can sign up and I'll send updates. I think I dropped it in at 6:28 Central Time into the host panel. The other thing that we have coming out, which is exciting, is do I have it here? I thought I did. Oh, here. So talk about MVOCs. So this is a mold sensor that we co-developed. So this actually detects the musty odor. So this is an electronic nose. It's based on graphene. Our goal is to have it duplicate the dog nose as much as possible. Nothing like this exists. It's also got temperature and relative humidity sensors in it, and it's a moisture sensor. So whatever you mount it on will actually detect moisture in the wall. And then it all ties into a gateway, and then the data goes into a dashboard, and you get to track and follow all that. So we're also working on a blood test with Chris Shade at Quicksilver Scientific that will actually detect the components of the musty smell in your blood. And this is based on research from CDC and University of Montreal. They did the same study right about the same time. So they replicated the research, which of course I've already expressed my appreciation for. And so as a result, they kind of packaged it up for us. So we've got an air test now, but we've got a dust test on the way, a blood test on the way, and an environmental sensor or environmental risk monitor, really. So the goal here is to be able to give everyone the tools they need to be able to accurately detect these things based on real science, and really empower people, because this is, like I said, this is table stakes, folks. We all live in buildings and breathe air, right? It's so fundamental, and so I hope that you, like I said earlier, you can't unsee this.
Thank you so much, Jason. And his website, by the way, is just, there's so much information on it. Definitely go over there, check everything out, take advantage of this 10% off to get testing if you need it. Jason, thank you so much. This was incredibly wonderful. I can tell that our audience loved it, and I had a great time. So thank you, and I learned a lot.
Me too.
So thank you so much.
Me too.
Thank you,
for having me.
everyone.
Thank you,
Have a
everyone.
great night.
Thanks.